Up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. Arise, the Honest Man's Podcast, episode 54. Jai and Karuna with you as per usual, and our dear friend David Madhava Prabhu from Ypsilanti, Michigan, joining us again. He's been with us many times and one of our most favorite and dear guests. So we're very happy to have him with us for this topic today. So this was actually going to be our first episode. And then scheduling stuff happened, and so we kicked it off last week with Padmanabha Maharaj, which was really wonderful. But today's episode is quite important. It's quite essential because we want to revisit what exactly is the vision behind what we're doing. Why is it the Honest Man's Podcast? What is the essence of our contribution? And yeah, so that's what it's going to be centered around. I'm sure a very critical discussion, and yeah, happy to be here. So Jai, you were saying perhaps maybe starting off with the kind of feedback that I was getting, right?
Yeah, which is I honestly the feedback you were getting, I've heard that feedback once or twice from a couple of friends here in the States, but I, being who I am, I just dismissed it more or less immediately, um, for reasons that I'll bring up in the course of the conversation. But maybe you can let's hear the feedback that you were getting enough of that it made you want to change the tagline to the podcast, which I was resistant to. So let's set that context there.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, so in essence, we really at the end of 2020, Jai and I were considering, because it all really came from this men's group that we had, that Jai started and that I became a part of, where the whole idea was for guys to come together and to be able to talk very openly and honestly in full vulnerability about some of the stuff that we're dealing with, like what are the issues that young men are facing in the world of today, especially being young devotees, or let's say young male devotees not being excluded at all from many of the men's issues that young guys are facing in the world. And so that was kind of like the beginning, and what we had in that sangha was so valuable and so special that we felt we needed to bring it to more people. And so that is how this podcast started, really, with that thing of like, how do we bring potential solutions and critical discussions around men's issues to a more sort of public space. Then we began right at the beginning with that episode, am I a bad yogi because I like porn, right? Pornography use being such a rampant phenomenon in amongst young guys. And but then as it unfolded, it it kind of happened in this way that a lot of the things that we covered pertained pretty much to the essential human condition. Like, women could benefit just as much from hearing our podcast as men could, and even women listening to the podcast getting a lot of perspective on like key men's issues, helping them to understand their own men better, or just men in general. And so women getting a lot of benefit from it as well. And so I received feedback from a few people that it might be prudent to make the podcast a little bit more universal, because when a lady tunes in, she may feel, the very first thing I used to say men rising up, now I say rising up, because I feel it's still the same thing, right? And it's just like there may be some feeling like, oh, if a lady listens, oh, this is not for me, right? Like I'm kind of being excluded from it. Whereas if she didn't hear that particular wording, she may feel more included and be more inclined to keep listening and paying attention to the content that we put out. So, I had a feeling that perhaps we could consider changing our branding a little bit, just for the sake of not making anyone feel excluded, because we want to serve all jivas as much as we possibly can. At least I do. So so I brought this to Jai's attention. We consulted with Deva and
Well,
Danya as well.
before the consultation with Deva and Danya, Karuna Avatar brought it to me, and I said I'm willing to be amenable to the idea, but my immediate reaction is no, because what's wrong with excluding people? That was my first question. And if we have a man's space, for example, yes, it means women are excluded from the space. But if you have a woman's space, that means men are excluded. And my intuition tells me, and the culture really tells me, that no one would have a problem with that. If it was just a woman's space that excluded men, no one would have a problem with that. If it was an LGBT space, which excludes, straight people, no one would have a problem with that. If it's like a black space, no one would have a problem with that. But somehow when it's a man's space, oh, why are you excluding others? So for me, it was just a matter of kind of like a resistance to what I would view as a cultural hypocrisy, that certain demographics, or practically all demographics, can have their exclusive spaces, and they're even esteemed or glorified for that. But as soon as there's like a male exclusive space, suddenly it's like a problem. And just like people, like from what you were telling me, people were like, yeah, I feel a little excluded. So I was like, what's the problem? Are you supposed to be included in all spaces? Like, isn't that a little bit entitled? And maybe, like, when I was growing up, that kind of would have been called narcissism, that you think you're entitled to all spaces and that you have the right to be a part of all spaces. So I just immediately was like very resistant to it. And then we kind of gave back, and Karuna and I went back and forth a little bit. And I was giving the argument also that I think men talking about men's issues, especially if they're doing so in a way that's vulnerable, that's also interesting for women. And therefore, women are also tuning in for that reason. And so there's like an appeal to that also. Oops, sorry, I think I broke up a little bit.
No, it's all good. You came through fine for me. Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of went back and forth, and Karuna and I, because as you all can tell, our personalities are very different, but we jive really well together. It's like two sides of a polarity. But we were coming at an impasse on this. So then we went to Deva and Danya because they were both related to our podcast. We very much value their intelligence and their input to kind of break the impasse. And we're going to share that also. But I guess I want to put that question first on the table before we further the context here. Like, do you think people would have a problem, like the people who were talking to you, Karuna, do you think they would have a problem with it if it's just like a woman's podcast which excludes men, or an LGBT podcast which excludes, heterosexuals, or, like a black podcast which excludes, whites, the people of color podcast, no whites allowed? Like, I don't think people would have a problem with that. So why would they have a problem, or seem to be like kind of triggered when it comes to men saying like, hey, we're going to have
yeah but the thing is, like, that's where we at in time, right? Like of course we all know, like, that's just where we're at politically. But for me, from the very beginning, I want to point out, like, my main thing was, it's not a political thing. Like, my thing is, it's an experiential thing. It's like any given female individual listening in, or like becoming aware of the podcast and seeing the honest man's podcast and men rising up, like, just experientially, like, she may feel, oh, this is not for me. Not like getting triggered by the men are not allowed to have a space of their own. That's not like that wasn't what it was about for me. But everything becomes political these days, and I guess we're kind of like also a bit sensitive, or just like sick and tired of that, because everything is just politicized almost automatically, right? So I just want to say, like, for me, it was totally on the experiential thing. And just in general also, that's kind of like what I also consciously try to bring to this podcast, is like the experiential element, right? Because what is really a person's personal experience, that's my interest. And I think bringing that to people is important. But anyway, that's a slight side note. So
we went to Deva
Yes.
We started a small WhatsApp group with just Deva and Danya, and Deva responded first, and Deva was kind of neutral, which I was like, "Come on, Deva." I was looking for the support, the W. So yeah, Deva, what did you hear? And yeah, and maybe you could kind of explain your response a little bit.
Well, I've been in between close friends before. I don't like it. So I respect so much what you guys are doing, and I want it to be what you guys are doing. As the kind of, whatever I am in relationship to Boudica, I didn't want to like unnecessarily throw my weight around and then get in the way of the creative dynamic that's happening between you two. What I considered after the fact, not when I sent my message, but leading up to this conversation especially, was how what you all have done and what Boudica is trying to do in general, and thank goodness we do now have a women's podcast. Thank you, Sardia. There is something of a deficiency in our community in general around these kinds of healthy spaces where people can come and hear honestly what's going on in life and how to face it, removed from the kind of almost hackneyed ideals of the Bhagavad and our bhakti culture that we're all very familiar with in a kind of rote way, but maybe haven't internalized as much. So people are desperate for the kind of space that you all have created. And I can appreciate how some people would feel like, hey, I need this too, so why are you calling it a man thing? Because it creates that some sense of not allowedness. And I guess I'm sensitive to that from Karuna's point, that the devotee community needs what you guys are doing, whether they're men, women, or otherwise. And so, and we know that a lot of people have watched and appreciated what you've done, no matter their orientation, gender-wise or other. So I think the proof is in the pudding also, that because the framing has been as a men's podcast, that keeps things contextualized. Everyone needs to know how to relate to men better than they do right now, whether you're a woman or a man or otherwise. Men are going to continue to be an important part of the world, like it or not. So establishing a healthy way to relate to men via a targeted discussion about men is in no way exclusive from the kind of like prohibitive side that I see. I see that kind of contextualization as healthy, and people who have a problem with that, if you try to please everyone, you'll please no one, or as I like to say, if everyone likes you, no one can love you. So we've got a lot of people that love us. I'm not too worried about a few people if they decide not to like us, because we've created a space that has some context beyond the postmodern egalitarian blah that they're all used to.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Like, you can't please everyone, right? And I like to make people happy. So sometimes that has to be that has to be it's just that's like my anarta, right? Like I'm always like I'm just always trying to keep everyone happy, and you get yourself in trouble. I think I'd also like to share what Danya said, because she made some really nice points.
Because she kind of broke the impasse, because Deva's words now are very nice, but in the message it was like, it was like very neutral. I was like, come on, Deva, what's this? This neutrality. So it was like up to Danya basically to get, because basically whatever Deva and Danya concluded, I was going to be amenable to that. Like I had my strong opinion about it, but I was like, I'm amenable to a change. Like I'm really not that attached, but I have my strong view on it. But if the group says like this, I'm totally happy to change my ways. Not my ways, but just acquiesce to this particular scenario. So Danya, gave us a curve I absolutely loved.
Yeah, so she said, as a woman, I'm actually really keen on keeping it a men's podcast. I think that it keeps the discussions relevant with a running theme and also a mission statement that is specific. It's nice for it to be a men's podcast. And if a woman listens in, it's nice to experience it as being a fly on the wall. And in terms of balance, I think that lots of special attention should be shared on men's issues. Frankly, men are at the crux of many issues in this world, and they also have such a great power to make improvements and uplift the vibration. Magnifying and amplifying men's issues would be a great service to everyone, including women. So when I like personally, when I heard that, I was just like, okay, mic
Oh,
drop, done, sorted. Like I accept. you know. So yeah, so that kind of settled that. But now today we would now really like to unpack why the Honest Man's podcast, like beyond these kind of introductory principles, what exactly is the state of masculinity in the world today, right? Like what are young men going through in growing up? And because we just keep hearing toxic masculinity. So what is toxic masculinity? People I when people find out about the podcast and they ask me about it, I tell them that essentially our core purpose is to hone in on what is wholesome masculinity and how is wholesome masculinity developed, right? Like how is it stepped into, and so that's really at the core of it. And so I think perhaps now at this stage, let's try and get some sort of conceptual understanding around, like, and we'd like to pose this question to Deva, just hear his take on it. Like, Deva, toxic masculinity as opposed to wholesome masculinity, right? Because maybe we should start with toxic masculinity because that's all that everyone talks about these days, and we do see such deficiency in men being men, basically, right?
Mm. Yes, we do. And I guess I'll lean on our Bhakti philosophy a little bit in terms of what everything is characterized as toxic around it, with the kind of core value of toxicity and the core value of healthy. The core value of a healthy person is that they have a sense of service. And the core value of a toxic person is that they have a greediness, they have a desire to be served. So when I look at toxic masculinity and what people have with the problems they have with the patriarchy, if the patriarchy was taking care of them the way it's supposed to, then they wouldn't have a problem with it. But it's not taking care of them. It's not serving the people that the institution of masculinity is meant to serve. And so people are rightly upset. Now they go to the point of wanting to tear down the institution, which from a philosophical side in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is the fundamental framework of the reality that it's a patriarchy. Krishna is a guy at the top of it all. And it trickles down into human society as well, that men are meant to be the leaders, the protectors of feminine, of the young, of the old, of everyone. And men are failing in their responsibility to protect, full stop, no doubt. So that is healthy masculinity, is developing your ability to care for others in a healthy way, not that subordinates them into sycophants or kind of like undue dependence, but takes care of and creates a context where they can thrive, where they can live out independence as it's healthy for them and be freed of the concerns that they're not meant to be encumbered with because your masculinity is protecting them.
I wanna take it back a few steps, because the toxic masculinity thing, it has like an actual academic history that I should have probably looked. I didn't think we would take this angle, but it has an academic history that would probably have been useful to really unpack what people mean today and how it was culturally developed, this idea of toxic masculinity. But just taking shelter of our scriptures and thinking about it more fundamentally, one thing that I noticed, like culturally speaking, is that the sense of like ego is being demoralized and dissolved. And just like in the States, at least, for example, there's this whole new ideological thing coming up about there being, like, for example, non-binary, where there's no gender, or there's both genders, or it's one gender one day and another gender the other day. And it's like before like 2015, I don't think non-binary was even a thing. And now it's like very much in the cultural psyche. It's kind of has a strong grip. And there's this sense that there's no sense of actual ego anymore. And I have my own speculations about that, which probably sound conspiratorial to some people, but for me, it's just more like a philosophical thing, that when you don't have a strong sense of identity, then you become open to everything. And so I feel that this gender ideological imposition on the society is intended to make better consumers. Because once you have a strong identity, then that means strong values and things that you like, things that you don't like, things that you do, things that you don't do, and things that you engage with, things that you don't engage with. But if you don't have a strong ego, then you're open to everything. So a dissolution of the ego makes for a very good consumer. And so I think there might be some sort of ideological attack on humanity. That's the conspiratorial side. Anyway, we're not going to get into that part. But where it's kind of dissolving the sense of ego. So men don't have a strong sense of what it means to be a man, and women don't have a strong sense of what it means even to be a woman these days. I mean, we're not going to even talk about that thing that came up where the lady, the black lady that was, elected into the Supreme Court couldn't define woman. Like, you can't with that. She was asked what is a woman. She said, I can't tell you. Okay, so we don't have a strong sense of identity. So what is healthy masculinity? I feel like, and I think I've talked about this before, there's this concept of like sincerity, and then this concept of authenticity. And sincerity is the idea that there's these archetypes that you are intended to step into. So let's say in a culture, let's say our culture, we hear the stories of Mahabharata. And in there, you're presented like several archetypes of man: the Brahmana man, the Kshatriya man, the Vaishya man, the Shudra man. There's the outcast man. There's the tyrant man. So you're presented like all these archetypes. And then if you're a sincere man, you have a male body. That's what we mean by man. Man means adult human male, just because we have to define things like this now. Then you're expected to be sincere and step into one of those archetypes. And, and that's considered as a healthy man, for example. Whereas in our postmodern culture, you're expected to be like authentic. And authenticity in this, as I'm defining it in a very specific way, is a sense of like building your own identity. And you can, if you want to, you can take from these archetypes, but a lot of them are considered archaic and outdated. So you kind of like just build yourself up in whichever way you want. And that's considered authentic. And so not having like healthy reference points to even as a template for even building our authentic manhood, then we're left kind of like we're open to toxicity and in ways that, are expressed in today's culture because we don't have any healthy reference points that to step into or to template our own building of masculinity up to in a way that's appreciable. So that's I'm going to take it back there. What are the healthy archetypes that we're supposed to be work as a foundation for the building up of our identity?
Yeah,
to just explore it ourselves and just kind of figure out ad hoc, and which doesn't seem to be working very well.
Yeah. That's I really like that, Jai. And I'd just like to add on to that. You're saying like you're framing it using these two words, sincerity and authenticity, where like, and I'll just add on to that a little bit. Like the authenticity is, authenticity is a word that is very dear to me personally, but I define it differently. To me, it means like, being just honest with where you're at, right? Like this is also like Deva's core value, right? Like honesty. That's just the thing. He really likes to say that. So being honest with where you're at and being willing to be open and just to be real with where you're at. But okay, so Jai, your framing of authenticity is to just like, just kind of figuring it out. And I think that's like a bottom up approach, right? It's like you have no reference point, whereas using the word sincerity is more like a kind of a top down approach where we have like and that's the whole thing. We can also frame it in terms of like how just a sense of objective truth is disappearing out of the world. Because if there is no objective truth,
Right.
then there's nothing to look up to, right? Because everything is just whatever we make it out to be. So if it's all just relative and we all just create our own reality, then yes, everyone does have to start at the bottom in this vast world of information overload. Like, Jai, what did you say the other day? Like technocratic
I call
reality?
Oh, did I?
No, not technocratic. Like you were saying, like what was that hype? Like I don't know how you framed it. Like when we asked Padmanabha Swami about what it's like to be a monastic in a hypersexual techno something world. What was that term?
World.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is just like, okay, it's all relative, and just from the bottom up, you've got to figure it all out. That is incredibly bewildering, and it's like, so I just really appreciate this point of needing to consolidate a sense of solid identity, which will by default mean exclusion, because identity means that there are certain limitations to who and what you are, and what you need to pursue, and what you need to value. But that's also, I guess, why it's really hard to define things solidly these days, because exclusion as a as a thing in the world today is a problem. Hence, the beginning, or just like in relation to the beginning of our conversation today, and Jai, you getting so triggered by this whole thing. Like, exclusion is by default going to be a part of our experience if there is such a thing as objective truth, right? And if there is such a thing as fundamental archetypes of being that we can identify as worthy end goals that we work towards.
Yeah, David, what do you say about this? Like when you're building I don't think I'm a good example of a man, honestly. I've talked about that with Karuna Avatar before with this whole podcast. I mean, I'm just gonna let everyone know that when we started this podcast, I said I do see myself phasing out at a certain point in the podcast, because I don't think I'm an ideal example of a man. An ideal example of a man for me, because the way I think about it is like, there's a archetype. So an ideal man in the culture is a father, for example, is a husband, is maybe a landowner, like he has property, he's doing a certain amount of protection of his family members, he plays a role in the community that's very critical. I don't think I'm a very good example of that. I do think the sort of person that I am can also be very useful for society, but not in the service of a man. And so for that reason, I wanted to phase out at a certain point. But people kind of like me. They like how I am, I guess. I'm still on for now. But I've been very vocal with that with Karuna Avatar. And I think, Dave, I may even mention it to you that at a certain point, I'm kind of like wanting to phase out because I'm not a good example of a man. But Dave, a lot of us, we consider you like a very super excellent example of a man. Like a lot of us amongst our friends, we like joke that we're all children. But David, you're a man. You
right.
Really, we all like, kind of joke and glorify you in that particular way. So in terms of like this point about archetypes and building yourself up, like how does that play out in your own psyche? Like, how do you think about that?
Well,
for me, it's like a philosophical thing, but for you, I feel like it's more practical.
And that's why you're ever relevant wherever you are, is because you're a genuine philosopher. So your place here is irreplaceable, and don't doubt it.
Touche.
Yeah.
I'm not letting you go, Jai. Like you gotta know, it's not happening.
The question of archetypes always brings me first to I'll say negative archetypes that I just kind of reflected on growing up.
Right.
When I think back to elementary school and the posters on the wall, depending on your age, you're either looking at LeBron James or Michael Jordan. And in either case, what you're really looking at there is not, you don't know who that person's coach was. You don't think about how many thousands of hours they spent taking the same shot over and over in the gym. You're thinking about how they bought their mom a Hummer in high school. You're thinking about how many houses they own and the number of square feet. So it's all the archetypes we have are centered around enjoyment. And there may be some element of something worthy there. Actually, I'm not, to be LeBron James, it took a lot, actually. It took some things we all could involve in our life and be better for it. But the way that we're presented and view and relate to those archetypes is toxic by my original standard of what can I get? What can I enjoy? So that's why people are wondering, what do I do with my life? They're wondering what's going to get me the most enjoyment for the least amount of effort. Therefore, cryptocurrency. Therefore, my E-Trade account. These other get-rich-quick schemes that the millennial generation and beyond have really leaned into is because I can do a little and get a lot for myself. But there's no consideration of what can I give others? What's my responsibility to someone else? What's going to be the quality of their life based on the choice that I'm about to take? And somehow, I think because I had shout out to my dad. My dad was the guy that thought first about what's going to be the quality of somebody else's life. And that is how I'm going to make my choices. And that was very clear to me because he worked 20 hours a day sometimes. He had 2 jobs when I was growing up at certain points, so that my sister and I could go play soccer and we could have fresh food on the table rather than hamburger helper, Chef Boyardee, fast food junk.
Right.
And we were poor folks. We lived in the hood, but we lived a quality of life that the older I got, the more clear it was to me was exceptional as compared to the kind of atmosphere we were in. And it's because my mom and dad worked their tail off as best they could and best they knew how. So that choice, a healthy man thinks first, how is my choice going to impact others, and particularly those I'm responsible to in my life? When you use the Mahabharata as an example, Arjun, Bhishma, Bhima, Drona, all of the archetypes we're meant to look at, whichever side of the conflagration they're on, their first consideration is others. And a healthy man, that's their instinct, that's their default, that's their gut move, is to make a choice in that space.
This is amazing. What it brings me to, because I reflect on this a lot, especially in 2020 when I was really into storytelling, how the stories that we have inherited in our culture are a huge cause of the toxicity that we see amongst the human population in general, and of course amongst men specifically in the context of this discussion. You're bringing up, just as you were talking, I was remembering Spider-Man. I always used to joke about this. There's this one scene in Spider-Man. I haven't seen all the Spider-Man movies, but there's this one scene where he's hanging upside down on his web, and he's with, what's her name, Mary Jane or whatever. And she pulls down half of his mask, and she gives him a kiss. And in exchange, she's wanting protection and let's get married or whatever, have a relationship. But he's like, I can't do it because it's too dangerous. And I was like, then why'd you take that kiss? I remember that being my response when I saw that. I was like, well, if you're not gonna give her shelter, then why'd you take that kiss?
Exactly.
That, and then and so as a child inheriting that sort of story, then the archetype, what gets transferred is that you can enjoy without sacrifice, without taking the responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And so the sort of stories that we've inherited have contributed a lot to the toxicity. That which has been blamed on men because men are inherently stoic and they have qualities that aren't really good for the culture or whatever. It's well, what about the stories that you're feeding us that give us really unhealthy archetypes to follow? So I that particular point.
Yeah, just related to that, Deva Madhava Prabhu, you were also saying right in the beginning, it's toxic versus wholesome masculinity is essentially, you framed it in terms of getting and giving, right? Taking and or it's either for me or it's for others, selfish or selfless. And I think that framing is just so it's really, really, really at the core of it. And it's essentially the element of sacrifice. More and more people are becoming less and less willing to make sacrifice, to perform austerity, to do things that are difficult. Enjoyment as a as an endeavor, or as a core value of life and existence, just seems to be taking over more and more and more and more and more. And then, you know, around, it's like enjoyment is at the essence, but then I feel like, you know, the Western world is basically characterized by the pursuit of comfort and convenience. So then what happens, and this is also what I'm seeing a lot in so many of the people that I work with in a professional capacity, is that guys just have no more backbone. You know, it's like there is just as a common observation, there is just no more backbone. The ability to grit your teeth, be determined, have discipline, do what needs to be done, push through, work hard, sweat, bleed, whatever it takes. That capacity is just fading away into oblivion, practically
Now,
speaking.
I have a
And
question about that.
mhm.
And then this is a good point to put it, because I wanted to bring it up anyway in the course of this conversation. How much of that erosion of the ability to grit, as you're saying, is due to man growing up primarily around women exclusively? I mean to say, just, and I don't have a strong opinion about this, and that's why I'm putting it on the table for conversation. But if you look at a lot of the what they call as the manosphere of content creators, which is I've spent some time, you know, just looking at how men are thinking about men's issues today. One theme that comes up a lot in this manosphere of content creators is that a lot of young boys, they spend a vast majority of their time around women growing up. You know, when you're in school, the vast majority of teachers are women. They are maybe go to a daycare, those are women. And of course, in a lot of these spaces, they may hear a lot about men exclusively from a woman's perspective. And so how much, and so a lot of the you know, men in this manosphere of content creation, they say they're attributing the toxic masculinity due to insufficient, like, mature masculinity in the life of a child in his developmental stages, particularly after puberty. And it's just like too much woman energy. Now, obviously, this could be, if you know, articulated skillfully, like I've just not articulated skillfully. It's a way to like trigger someone and, you know, cause an argument. But I'm just I don't have a strong view about this as of yet. Like, I haven't thought about it deep enough to form a strong view on it. But how much of it, this inability to grit, the erosion of that ability, is due to being like oversaturated with the feminine energy in the developmental stages. I remember, and just one other thing about that, I remember for my mom growing up, that was like something she was really afraid of. So she sent me and my brother to our uncles, because it's a single mom. So I spent a lot of my youth going to my uncles, and they lived in the actual hood. Like, I know I say ghetto in all sorts of contexts to be funny, but they lived in the actual ghetto.
The ones
I'm
in the
talking
rap songs.
yeah, I'm talking the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, which is literally like a war zone.
Yeah.
And when you were scared to go to the corner store to pick up some Flamin' Hot Cheetos because you might be shot. That sort of ghetto. My mom would send us over there just because she wanted us to be around our uncles, because she was very much afraid that just by being only around her and only by around women teachers, that we would be oversaturated with femininity, and that would somehow disturb our developmental stages to become men. How much do you think this is playing a role in this erosion of the ability to grit and the toxic masculinity? Like, maybe this is the first time you've heard this, but what do you think about this?
I have some thoughts on this, and perhaps it will expand the question, but I want to put it to Dev Madhava Prabhu first, and just hear if anything has come up for you immediately, Prabhu.
I remember a conversation I had with my excuse me, with my cousin, and he's a VP at an insurance firm in Manhattan now. He's like high flying lawyer, MBA type. And he was discussing how the entire atmosphere of business and politics has actually become saturated by feminine energy. Excuse me. And that's why women themselves are frustrated, is because they need that masculine presence as well. It's been totally eroded. And so now nobody's happy. And I thought it was a very preaching comment from somebody who's more or less an atheist.
Yeah. To me, what comes up is a kind of a let's call it a bit of a chicken and egg debacle, right? Because we're saying men are we're just looking at like present day reality, right? Guys are lacking backbone, then they're unable to execute, they're unable to be selfless and be disciplined, etc. Okay, that's where we're at today. Now, Jai, you're saying, what is the role of not having a strong masculine presence assisting in raising a boy? And that relates to the fact, and this is also something that I'm seeing in a professional capacity, working with a lot of people. Everyone has daddy issues. Everyone, practically. It's incredibly rare to find any person, actually girls included, like females included, who have healthy relationships with their dads. Everyone has daddy issues, and it's just it's really, really, really frightening. So now it points to, okay, so in order for a young man to grow up well and to develop strong masculine qualities, and what exactly do we mean by that? That means the capacity to take the lead, the capacity to take initiative, to provide structure, to make difficult decisions, to take steps.
Sounds a little archaic to me, but okay, continue.
No, you're just being facetious now.
I'm being facetious because that's the thinking around it today.
Yes, but the thing is, sorry. The thing is, even though that is the thinking around it today, but at a certain point, like we have to take a stand and start talking around this topic. Like, what is the ontological objective truth here about masculinity? What is masculinity? Where exactly did it begin? And this is where I'm going to come back to the whole chicken egg debacle, because it's like, okay, boy grows up not being a proper man because he didn't have a proper man raising him, but then that guy didn't have a proper man raising him. So it's just like, where did it go out the window? Where did wholesome masculinity go out the window? Where did our worthy role models disappear? Is there a certain point in time? Can we look at the Western world now? And this is something, actually, I'm thinking of Hari Vilas, because I think this is something that he would have had something particularly interesting to say. Looking at the Western world, where did we lose worthy role models to look up to? Like, where did it go wrong? That is kind of my question, because it's really like an intergenerational thing. But in like right now, what we're seeing right now is that the issue is let's say the pace of degradation is increasing. It's like, since, I would say, what I'm observing in my own experience, because I study people, that's what I do. So I'm always interacting and I'm always inquiring, and I'm seeing basically like a lot of guys above 40 today still have like some decent sense of masculine energy. I know I'm making a lot of generalizations, but this is from personal experience. It's just like, if we had to draw a line somewhere, a lot of guys above 40 there's still something there, but it's just becoming less and less. So yeah, so that's my curiosity, is like, can we trace it back to a certain point in time and be like, okay, where did solid masculinity go out the window?
I've got two things. You're speaking sociologically. One is from one of the founding philosophers of America. The founding fathers get a lot of attention, the guys that like sign the papers, but they were all being influenced by who I like to call the founding philosophers, the thought leaders who then informed the politicians, the brahmanas, basically, at the founding of America. And one of my favorites is John Locke. And John Locke, among other things, spoke about the idea of natural law and natural rights. And he said that every society must attend to both. Natural law is what we would call dharma, universal principles of responsibility, that by serving, you become uplifted and those around you feel protected. Natural rights are what you get, right? What you deserve to be provided by the society. And John Locke's point is that everybody in the society has a relationship to both. You have something you're entitled to, and you have something you're responsible to. A healthy society is the one where natural law gets more attention. Your sense of purpose, your sense of membership as a good citizen is more towards upholding the experience of universal principle, natural law. When the concern becomes too heavy on natural rights, what do I get? What do I deserve? What should you give me? What's been taken? That's when things become, as they would say today, toxic. So this is a man speaking in the 1700s, but he's perfectly characterizing exactly what is wrong today, which is that everybody wants to know what is their right, but nobody is concerned or discussing what is my responsibility being a citizen or a member of this particular society or group. So I'll leave it there and see if.
Yeah, the natural law point, just taking it one step before that, from where do you derive the natural laws? And that was usually the metaphysics of a culture.
Yes.
So, the natural laws are derived from the Vedas, for example, if we're following the Bhagavad Gita. And so as cultures have become increasingly divorced from their metaphysics, their ability to understand natural laws also compromised. And therefore, again, they become open to like anything and everything, every speculation under the book. So as we were saying, because I had my idea, like, when did we lose this? When did men or just culture in general lose the ability to find healthy role models and so on? It seems to me the more that it can be traced with the increase of the secularization of society. When you start to not care about the metaphysics of, like, I know, like, say the Christian West, for example, the ideal man is Jesus. And you were considered, to the degree you were able to like be Christ-like, Jesus-like, then you were like doing good. Not least to all sorts of maybe other problems, but just as a reference point for visual sake, and for us, the ideal man, of course, is Krishna. But after Krishna, the Pandavas, for example, Narada Muni, for example, Sudama Brahman, for example, you have all these different archetypes that you're getting from your metaphysical literatures. And from there, you can derive the natural laws, how I'm supposed to be, because the ego needs that.
Yes.
The ego needs the assistance of the metaphysical principles. Otherwise, its plasticity allows it to be morphed into anything and everything. And that's kind of what we're seeing today, which has kind of become so problematic. So, yeah, it seems that, that would be my addition to what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I'll jump in just to, I mentioned a second thing I wanted to share, which perfectly segues where you left it, Jai. We need something to worship. And to your point, Jai, it's very helpful for consumer culture if people have no sense of a healthy thing to worship. Then not only do they being a good consumer means not only wanting the product, but feeling that you need that product. I cannot exist. I'm not a member of the species unless I have the new iPhone in my pocket. Why else do people camp out in front of stores for days for some Jordans, right? Anybody who grew up in that part of the world when they were a kid, I remember, like, Mom, we're driving by the shoe store. there's a liquor store and there's a shoe store. It's like, that's what's there just around the corner from my house. And we're driving by and I'm like, Mom, why are they lined up outside the shoe store? So it's unfathomable, right? I've got my $12 like Velcros on. These kids, parents are spending $175 on pairs of shoes that they will outgrow in 2 months. That was an aside I didn't intend to enter into, but
yeah, know it well. I know it well.
Where did the modern loss of an ideal that's in any way healthy happen? I like to point to the music, and if you look at the 60s and what we would call Prabhupada's generation, there was this attempt at coveting love. That was the West's attempt at love and something universal and transcendent. And it failed because their idea of love was more based in the sensual experience of free love or just sex with whoever we want whenever we want.
Right.
So then when the attempt at love failed, you swung it from the hippie generation into the hedon generation, the 80s, which was fueled by cocaine and characterized by like big hair bands and just loud, crass metal music, just motive passion. When that failed, the pendulum swung to the nihilistic 90s, and that's where the heroin culture grew up. The heroin epidemic that you see today is because everybody was listening to Nirvana and Alice in Chains in the 90s, where you had Kurt Cobain saying mantras like, all I know is all we are. All I know is all we are. Enter the famous song everyone knows, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Entertain me. Like that's the value of our generation. They set the tone for who we are today. This is what we think life is about. Entertain me. Smells like Teen Spirit. So then you've lost any ideal of transcendence. Even your own hedonism, is not truly worthy. So then today you just live in this nihilistic place where sometimes when I feel like feeling good, I will, but I'll just read a blog article that tells me how feeling bad is also a good thing that you can feel and just be okay with where I'm at in the immediate. And there's no sense of needing to rise up to any other ideal than the emotion that the moment has put me in. And we just become, as you said prior, Karuna, just totally invertebrate, no backbone, nothing to stand for. And we learn very well how to rationalize whatever emotion I'm having right now as the best thing I could be experiencing or doing.
You know, I'm sure there's so much here, David. Bringing it back a little bit to what you brought in just a few minutes ago. You know, you were just emphasizing basically the natural law. Okay, so what does that mean? Top down, truth with a capital T. That's what we need to value. What do we exactly look up to? And that, I feel that's really where the conversation is headed. And I have some just some feelings to share around like the issues that we face when we begin to discuss truth with a capital T in the context of the sort of like societal values that we are in at the moment. But just, you know, one thing that I'd like to bring in. I'm reading Jordan Peterson's book again, 12 Rules for Life, and there's a chapter that I'm busy with at the moment called "Pursue What Is Meaningful, Not What Is Expedient." And in this chapter, like Peterson makes this really fascinating analysis of what Christianity, but specifically Lord Jesus Christ as an archetype of enlightened being, what that brought to the table and what it gave people to be able to look up to Lord Jesus Christ. Because there's this in Christian, what shall I say, in the Christian way, it's kind of like stepping into the how shall I say, stepping into the trying to embody the Savior himself, right? By living by the same principles that he valued and that he preached. And how, but that places just so much pressure on people, right? Because it's like Lord Jesus Christ just being like this perfect archetype, and placing so much pressure. And then, you know, then some Christian, then he discusses how, you know, the church as this other entity begins emphasizing certain particular dogmas of, like, you know, the fact that, like, okay, Lord Jesus, he died on the cross for everyone, right? So like, you as an individual, there's nothing that you can actually do for the sake of your own liberation or ultimate freedom. It's like, you know, you just have to pledge allegiance to the cause, basically. And then he goes a little bit further and begins to discuss the contribution of Nietzsche. And, you know, one of Nietzsche's probably his most famous statement that he's most often quoted for is this 3-word phrase, God is dead. Now, that is actually said in a much greater context. Like, there's so much that led up to him making that statement. But, you know, what the consequence of that is, you know, after the Enlightenment in Europe, where, you know, Christianity, and, or let's rather say the church, basically failed to adequately address suffering. And that is basically what gave rise to the critical European mind. Like, let's look at the mechanisms of being and figure out, like, is there some way that we can deal with suffering more effectively? You know, but then, you know, over a few centuries, the critical Western mind develops to the point where, you know, Christianity is sidelined to such an extent, and then, you know, so God is dead being a more kind of like figurative statement. But then Nietzsche said, you know, the issue now is that because as you said, people need something to worship, people are going to start coming up with their own ideologies. And then you see in the early 1900s, you know, giving rise to communism and fascism that had such unspeakably evil outcomes, you know, and created so much suffering. So, you know, just all of that saying that we really, really need truth with a capital T to look up to, something to build up towards, right? And so then taking it all the way back to, what does it mean to really be a man? Right? Like, what are the worthy role models that we can look up to? Because what we're facing, I think for a lot of young guys, a lot of young devotee guys, it's like you read the Mahabharata and you read about these great heroes that have these almost like, but they're so virtuous that it's almost like it's unrelatable, you know. It's like it's almost like, I think you just can't imagine like being like Arjuna in truth, or like Yudhishthir, you know, like his sense of morality and his moral grounding is just, it's divine. It's truly divine. So now, like, okay, so a young guy becomes a man in full healthy masculine energy by having strong, powerful role models, which is seriously lacking, very seriously lacking. So how do we address this? How do we give that? How do we bring that to the table?
Well, I've been avoiding discussing this element because it's sensitive and it takes a lot. And it's, anyway, for those that are
Deva, sorry, just to interrupt. You're coming through a little bit softly. I don't know if it's possible. Hey?
Okay, all right.
You guys okay? There's like,
I can hear you. It's a little soft.
Yeah, it's a little soft, but we hope it's okay.
I wonder why. Maybe I'm not supposed to say what I was going to say.
No, say it. Corinne and I have these fancy $200+ mics, so that makes us come in through loud and clear. It's the mic.
When we talk about men, we have to talk about women, because that's the whole purpose. Men are not in a vacuum. There's this moment in the Bhagavatam where Lord Brahma is sitting on the lotus and he's all by himself, and he is having an existential crisis because he doesn't know who he is, because there's no one else to relate to. And so then God comes and he is then informed in a very profound way. But if men want to know what it means to be men, they have to understand also what's the relationship of women in their life. And taking it as a kind of reduced example in the Mahabharata, Draupadi, who is married to 5 of these noble men, her only service, all she has to do is tolerate them. That is her contribution, is to stick around and not prostitute herself to other energies, to other people. Don't go looking for anything from anyone else. But the men are expected, and they do. It's so when you have this framing and you start to read the Mahabharata in this way, to see the profound way in which these great men give so much deference to a woman, their every waking moment is to consider, is she okay? Is she safe? Is she happy? She is their deity. So if you're a healthy man, you have a deity as a woman in your life, and you learn how to attend to her every need. If I'm a good man, it's because I was a terrible one first, and I treated a woman, especially who mattered a lot to me, very poorly, all out of naivety, all out of a sincere but misplaced understanding of what masculinity is. I mistreated this person that matters a lot to me, and so I thought about it a lot, how to do things differently. And women are not to be expected to do anything. And in that space of not being expected to do anything, then they can do what is healthy and natural for them. But if I, as a man, am depending on my woman for anything aside from her tolerance of my existence, then it's an act of violence. It's an unwholesome relationship, and I'm spoiling the sacred dynamic that Krishna established.
That's very interesting and fascinating. You know, I'm hearing the voices of all the content creators in the manosphere, and a lot of this like retarded alpha male stuff. You know, I keep my woman in check, and it's completely retarded. But what I'm hearing from you, which is interesting for me, because again, I'm not a good example of a man, at least in my own opinion, but I'm an ideals person. So what I'm hearing from you is that in a lot of ways, how we are intended to be men, in some ways at least, kind of reflects the original reality. Because Krishna, as far as we're concerned at least, Krishna exists only for Radha. And his expansion of himself and the various avatar forms and the various realms in which those avatars exist and so on is basically in reciprocation with her, for her pleasure. That's kind of how we think about Radha Krishna. And Radha Krishna is the first cause. So we're the effect. You know, the effect, the cause is inherent in the effect. So if we are the effect of this first cause, which is Radha and Krishna, then it does make sense to me that in some ways, how the effect is in some ways intended or naturally in a healthy state kind of imitates the first cause, Radha Krishna. So in that sense, what you're saying, I can be compelled to that understanding. I guess, I don't know, I guess there's a part of me that wonders though, like, I feel like there are men who've tried to, you know, kind of embody that spirit to something. Maybe not that there are tons of them, but I do feel like there are men like that for sure. But the women themselves are also having Purusha Abhiman in our philosophy. They try to act like the Purusha too. You know, we have Purusha Abhiman, like I'm the man, but the woman, the soul in the woman's body is thinking, no, I'm the man. And so to kind of surrender yourself to another entity in that way, I don't know. I guess for me, that's where like the doubt is coming up. The conviction is like, yeah, that makes sense. That reflects Radha Krishna Lila. Like, we're the effect. That's the cause. That makes sense. But the other part of me is like, oh no, the old sister girl over there kind of toxic too. And if I'm trying to just exist for her with her massive Purusha Abhiman, that probably ain't gonna work either. So what is your response to that?
Choose wisely.
Yes.
because okay, and now a more measured and kind response. That we all have it twisted at present. We all have it twisted at present. So there is no one of us who's not affected by this unwholesome dynamic in society at present. And I've contributed to and enjoyed that unwholesome dynamic myself. So my own mental adjustment is that when I'm getting some undue flack from the ladies, and they're trying to be the enjoyer and controller. They're trying to be the male in the relationship, taking my service essentially, and then getting mad at me for it. I accept that as a kind of due reaction for my own unwholesome enjoyment for so long. That's how I rationalize it in my mind. This is just me taking the punishment I deserve. And it could and should be much worse, but let me just accept the situation for what it is and be tolerant enough, be patient enough for that person I'm caring for to come around and appreciate that the right way is the better way. The right way is the happier way for them also. Because yes, they have these conditionings that they've been given, these unhealthy modalities of how they should be, and who my heart goes out to every woman existing in this time and space. They are, especially in the devotee community, not only are they failing all secular standards, they're failing all devotee standards also. And their feminine nature puts them so deeply aware of their own so-called failings and so-called shortcomings. None of us could ever criticize them more than they criticize themselves every day.
Sure.
And so then as a man, to in any way contribute to their own already unhealthy sense of inadequacy is just a horrible act of violence. So again, taking the responsibility that enough is enough and I'm going to be enough for this person, whether they accept me or not, even if they handle me roughly by their embrace, even so, this is how I also meditated on it as healthy for my bhakti, that if I learn to serve this person in this way, then it's much easier for me to learn and lean into serving Krishna in this way. And in this way, it's a healthy ashram for me to develop in my devotional service, which is the ultimate goal here.
The problem that we're facing, my dear friends, is that the truth is unpopular, unfortunately. But we like Jiva says, okay, wait, we'll get back to that. Jiva says, I'm confused when Deva says that women shouldn't be expected to do anything when Shastra says the wife should submit to the husband.
And consider him her guru. I'm your guru. This is disrespect.
That's like okay. Anyway, Deva,
You said the truth was unpopular. Here's the truth.
Yes. So again, we have. Let's just take that at face value. Fine.
Yeah, right.
But when the disciple comes to you, they're not expecting to be qualified. They're expecting your influence to qualify them. That's what it means that they are your disciple. And so when they come to you as guru, the first thing that your disciple is doing is taking all the suffering and confusion that they've existed in, at least in this one life, and certainly its lifetimes accrued, and putting that at your feet now, and needing you to help them be okay in that space, to accept them unconditionally. That's what our spiritual master, we expect them to do, right? Take me as I am and make me something better. So when you have this preconceived idea of what a chaste Vedic wife is, and then you marry some girl and are mad that day 2 she doesn't have the khichdi the way you want it, you're not helping the situation. You're not going to get yourself much khichdi later on. To Jai's point, I heard Bhakti Vidyapurna Maharaj, one of the most famous renunciates in our community, Bhakti Vidyapurna Maharaj, say that in ISKCON we get Grihastha ashram all screwed up because we think that it's bad to imitate Radha and Krishna. So we get married, but then we resent each other. We carry this renunciate bhav through the whole relationship. And the other one is just the ball and chain and in the way. And some kind of concession that's been given to me that I have to go rub myself against occasionally to be able to carry on with my existence.
Oh, ghetto.
So awful. Maharaj said, you cannot help but imitate Radha and Krishna. That's what it means that you're a conditioned soul in the material energy. The point is that the Grihastha ashram is the safe place to be Radha and Krishna. This is the safe place to imitate Radha and Krishna. You try to imitate Radha and Krishna elsewhere, you get in more of a mess. But if you imitate Radha and Krishna in the Grihastha ashram, then you're both going to be uplifted, because both Radha and Krishna are thinking, how can I serve? Both Radha and Krishna thinking, how can I please the other? And so that dynamic begins with Krishna, begins with the Purusha. So it begins with the husband being ever deferent to the wife. And then eventually, from the conditioned place, it has to start with you. That's what it means. The man takes responsibility for setting the charge. Your lady comes around.
Very controversial, but I remember.
No, but
I remember Prabhupada saying that it is the nature of women. The reporter asked Prabhupada, "Do you think women should be subordinate to men?" And Prabhupada said, "I don't think they should be. They are." And I was like, Prabhupada, come on, help us out in the future. Like, you're making it really hard to defend some of your social points. But just how you've articulated it here just now, David, it makes it a little bit more amenable. If a man takes that level of responsibility, then in a sort of natural sequence, it's almost like a dance. So in a natural sequence, you take the lead. Okay, then I'm gonna. And that's in that sense, it seems more amenable, even for a postmodern mind like the one that I have.
Women are anindita. Kasyapa Muni uses this word towards Diti. He says anindita, irreproachable, beyond blame. They're not allowed to be held accountable for anything they do wrong, because it's your fault they did something wrong. If a woman does something wrong, it's because she was unprotected by the protectors she was meant to have. It's very uncomfortable. It's such an absolute dramatic way to live, but it's so refreshing. It's so empowering. It's your fault. Because on the other side, it's your fault if things go well. And this is why men like to, and it's healthy for us to pursue our Purusha Bhav in the mood of a servant, is that let me do things right for those that are depending on me. Let me make sure that things go well in their life. And that gets you out of bed. That gets you in the cold shower. That gets you eating the things you need to eat to stay healthy. That puts you to bed on time so you can wake up early the next day. That's what gets you moving in the right direction, is thinking that others are dependent on you.
There's no, I just personally take this approach of like, I don't know, I just feel there's no sense in pussyfooting around the truth, right? Like we might as well, this is who we are, and this is the kind of, this is the culture or the system of truth that we adhere to, and we might as well look at those core tenets and essential realities. And it's just, there are certain fundamental dualities of being, and like the one that I think is important here is leading and following, right? Like I personally, talking to, just speaking to Jiva's comment of like, the wife should submit or surrender or like completely like fall down in front. It's just I don't like that wording. But the thing is, someone is easy to follow when they are leading in a noble and virtuous and responsible and qualified manner, right? And so what that points to, because the thing is, like, the Shastras shouldn't even say, the Shastra, I'm going to make this statement, the Shastra shouldn't say that women should submit to their men, because the thing is, that is an automatic result if the man is leading in a proper way. Then to follow is natural, to take shelter, and that is the kind of wording that we should use. Surrender, submit, like, out the window. I'm sorry. It's just we can't be talking that way in the world of today. But taking shelter of, following, accepting protection, right? It's that is if the leader is qualified, that is the natural outcome. But now I would like to bring it back to this point of, like, Dania was also saying in the input that she gave in a subtle way. Dania, I can't speak for you, but that's kind of what it meant. Let me rather say that's what it made me think, is it begins with men.
Yes.
Like, and that's and so on that note, I would like to bring up this question, that I thought of a little bit earlier, if we address men's issues, does that to any significant degree solve women's issues by default? Like, if men are able to do the thing, be proper men,
100.
like women are gonna have, hey, what?
100%.
Yeah. What
There's a
is
sign driving out to Vrindavan from Delhi. There's a sign that says 140% veg. 140%.
Yes. Next question. That's an easy one. Next question. I know I did a video. This was like in 2019, I think. I did a video calling that male sovereignty is more important than female sovereignty. It was like a little social media thing. And obviously I titled it like that to be a little bit triggering, but I thought I had a good point. And my point was very simple, that the vast majority of the issues that are pushed into the collective psyche surrounding women have to do with men not being responsible in various sorts of ways. And so if we're going to solve the women's issues like that, then it requires the man to solve those issues.
Yes.
And therefore, in this sense, male sovereignty is more important than female sovereignty. Because if men are acting a fool, that's going to be a problem for the collective, because of their, generally speaking, their superior power and brutishness and so on. So yes, obviously yes. So then that brings me to the sort of part of the natural question that I wanted to bring up in the conversation, is that when I was hearing your feedback from these people, that hey, you guys are speaking to the universal human condition in general, therefore you should change the name. It doesn't have to be a man's podcast. So then the way I actually heard that, it was like, oh, we're not talking about men's issues enough. That's how I heard it.
That's kind of how.
That's how you heard it too. I would say, okay,
Yeah.
we're not zooming in on the man's issues enough, where people can really see, like, yeah, this is really the man's podcast. They're talking about men's issues, things that are very specific to men. So I want to put it on the table, and for those who may hearing the live either now or later, I want to know, what do you think are the men's issues? Like, men who are hearing this, I like to hear from your own personal experience, what are like some of the major issues. From women who may hear this in the future, you're looking at us, what you think some of the major issues are. And then that can be the content for a lot of our future episodes, how we might address those issues, at least within our own selves as individuals or in our communities. I want to know, what are the major man's issues that need to be brought up for everyone to feel confident that this is why it's called the Man's Podcast. And that's kind of how I heard it, that sort of critique. So I'm kind of curious about this. If men's issues are women's issues, so solving men's issues will automatically solve women's. Okay, so what are those issues that need to be put into the public space, in the conversation and so on?
While we perhaps wait for some input, I would like to just, let's just say one or two things about Arise the Honest Man's podcast. What are we doing here, right? Like in the context of this entire discussion and what you've just said, Jai, that's a good point, right? Like, if people are saying that, yeah, we're not talking about enough men's issues, and this is also. This is a major personal frustration that I've been experiencing in the last while. Jai, your screen is frozen. Are you still with us?
I'm with you. I'm sorry. I'm in Cali, Colombia, y'all, and the connection is all wishy-washy down here, rainforests and storms and all that.
So anyway, just kind of like in my own experience, in the kind of like milieu that I'm in right now, it's just incredibly frustrating to feel like I have very few men around me in my environment that are men, or that are acting as real, healthy, together people, men specifically. And so that's why I'm going to be getting on a plane to the USA shortly, so that I can come and associate with you guys and be
Go right
happy in that regard. Anyway, so what are we really doing here? I don't know actually why I just said that, but it's just like, on Arise, the Honest Man's podcast, we are having critical discussions, and we're bringing perhaps guys that have figured out certain aspects of what wholesome masculinity is, and having conversations around that and how people can apply these principles. What exactly is our purpose? How do you guys see it?
Last week we had Pavanamba Swami on. So one friend of mine, she was sitting here listening to the podcast. She's young. She likes the podcast. She was listening to it here live. And after the podcast, she said to me, the way she kind of hears the Honest Man's podcast was that conversations that are uncomfortable and kind of triggering, but the willingness to have those sorts of conversations. So I took note of that as a sort of inspiration. So I feel that's a sort of one of the big characteristics of the podcast, or at least the intention of it, the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations, honestly, without tabooing, without the unnecessary taboo that comes around talking about certain things in public spaces. I also have a little bit of a note. I did want to read this. I kind of wanted to read it earlier, but it came from another one of our hearers, also a single mother, actually, who wrote us right when we were planning this episode. So it was like a very like serendipitous sort of message. And I kind of wanted to read that to see how she hears, because the way she wrote gave me the sense of what our podcast could be about, or is about, or at least seeks to be. Is it okay if I read that?
Please do, Jai.
I hope my thing doesn't freeze, but here it goes. So she writes here. I'm just gonna scroll down a little bit. She says, "So I'm a single mother of two, my oldest being son. He is truly an amazing little human, and I consider my dharma as a mother to be my highest and most important priority right now." Shy. With that said, I worry a lot that I'm not able to provide for him what he needs as he grows, mainly a strong male role model or mentor, etc., as his dad is not a good influence on him. This fear causes me constant anxiety on a daily basis, although I know deep down that Krishna's will be done regardless, and that everything we experience, good and bad, is ultimately leading us back to him. Still, I worry. So my purpose of messaging you is to tell you all this is that I stumbled upon your podcast today and felt relieved that there may be options for him when he gets older to learn and gain true masculine wisdom, even in a non-conventional way, i.e. via the internet videos or audio podcasts. I just wanted to take the time to say thank you for the work you're doing for men everywhere. I hope you continue down this path of service, as I am confirmation to you that this is very much needed in today's broken world.
There you go.
She had a few more words, because I wrote back immediately saying, thank you for the encouragement. This could have been more well-timed. You can't even imagine. And then she wrote some more amazing statements there. So anyway, what she said, how part of the contribution that we are hoping to making.
Yeah, I don't, in the context of the Krishna Consciousness Society, we're basically, no one else is doing this really. So, Jai was making the statement earlier that he doesn't feel like he's a proper man, or he doesn't feel like he's exemplary in any way.
I'm most certainly, by the way, I don't have any weird
No. We know that your self-esteem is very well intact, my dear friend. But that, it's I just want to say that I feel the same. I feel the same way, Jai. But Jai, you're saying you're not going to be like a conventional man. You're not going to be a husband and a father. You're not going to when you were saying that earlier, I was thinking that basically what you're saying is that a conventional exemplary man is characterized by having a domain, like having a domain, a field of operation in which, like, let's say a domain in which he can take meaningful responsibility. That's what defines a man. Now, for myself, I feel like I'm like 3% there. I know exactly what I want to be. I know the kind of man that I want to be. I have been thinking and feeling and envisioning and just trying to be the best husband and father that I possibly can eventually. And I have to still grow in so many ways to be able to do that. But I think that brings I have a lot of vested interest in the existence of this podcast. I feel like, what we're trying to do here is I've told a lot of people, like, I'm actually an ideal recipient of this podcast, right? Like, some musician said, like, yeah, I just make the kind of music that I would like to listen to. So anyway, we really hope to create, to continue creating this space successfully and effectively to address men's issues and to talk about critical things. But we also need, all of you that are listening to bring your input. Jai was asking, what are the kind of issues that you think really need to be looked at and need to be addressed? What kind of conversation should we be having? Who should we be bringing into the space, to hear from? Like, please make your input. Jai, where, like, if people were to contact you, where do you like them to contact you primarily? What's the best place?
Probably social media, Facebook, Messenger, or Instagram. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a poll on my Facebook page and a poll on my Instagram page of the types of issues that people think are particularly pertinent to men. And it would be nice to have open, honest conversations about. And that way we have a sort of trajectory based on the audience that would hear us. Where we should go with some of the episodes. That way, the tagline "Honest Man's Podcast" is fully justified, and there's no ambiguity why it's called the Honest Man's Podcast. So I'll do a poll on my social media, and maybe you can also do, and that way that can give us more and more insight to the sort of things people think. Yeah, Deva, looks like you want to say something.
I'm just I'm reminded that my fundamental experience as a man is humiliation.
100%, yo, for real.
That's what it's like, especially in Kali Yuga. It's that every man is feeling humiliated and acting from that place. So let me get bigger muscles, let me get more money, whatever it is. Let me do that because I feel humiliated. I'm not living up to who I'm supposed to be. Whoever that is, I'm not even sure, but I'm humiliated. And I want to answer Jiva's question here in relation to that and how I frame this whole thing, that a man needs a woman to know who he is. Jiva, you say, I feel women are denying, rejecting the protection of men, and that's for sure. But consider that rejection is a vote of no confidence, that you can't protect because you don't know what I need. And so if men are fundamentally feeling humiliated, women are fundamentally always grieving. That's their baseline experience. They're grieving the loss of their protectors, who they're looking to be able to depend on, but have only been abused by in so many subtle and gross ways. And therefore, they're fundamentally grieving constantly.
Well said. I can really connect to that humiliation point as a man.
Yeah.
And that leading to the grievance point as a woman, that makes, for me at least as a man, so I'm not fully informed subjectively, but that makes sense that would be a fundamental experience of a woman. The humiliated man and the grieving woman. Wow, that's something to take home for me at least. Hare Krishna.
Krishna, Krishna.
That's an interesting contribution here by Garrison. He says, I would like to see the physiological challenges degrading and making it harder to be a man addressed. Why testosterone levels are declining at an alarming rate all over, especially the Western world. And of
Right.
course, very practical solutions to counteract this problem discussed in detail. I feel that it's an essential aspect of embracing a healthy and strong masculinity in this age and can no longer be taken lightly or neglected because of the nature of our food, water, environmental pollutants, etc.
Biology,
Yeah,
what it means to be a
yeah.
man.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, because our new Black Supreme Court woman, she couldn't define what is a woman because she wasn't a biologist. So it looks like we need to be inviting some biologists on to tell us what it means to be a man, just like the sort of physical stuff. That's a great contribution, Garrison.
Yeah, for sure. Like
We can also
declining
say that
testosterone.
Garrison got initiated over the weekend, so he's now Gorkishore Karuna Das.
Oh,
Wow.
snap.
Jai.
Congratulations, Gorky Shore Karunadas. Congratulations.
Stepping up,
That's a
manning
beautiful
up,
name.
we might say.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Dave Madhava Prabhu, any kind of final thoughts on just like let's say, you know, you've come onto the podcast as a contributor many times, but I'm sure you've also been a listener many times. And you know, you had this, you know, you started this incredible initiative of Boudica and created this space. And just, you know, so both as an individual, just David, I'm going to simplify the question. David Madhava Prabhu, your vision for what Arise the Honest Man's podcast is, and still can be. Any kind of final thoughts in that regard?
I feel indebted to you, Prabhus, for modeling these kinds of conversations, because this has been my anxiety here in our Harmony Collective community, and Boudica is part of my effort to alleviate my own anxiety, is that, and also make my own service much easier. It's very hard to be healthy in an unhealthy environment. Even if you create a little quarantine, you know, situation for yourself, the unwholesome elements are just a thin layer away from entering in and totally spoiling what you're doing. And I want to create a healthier society so that my little bubble can be much more secure and supportive. And so as you guys have these conversations and create these spaces and this awareness, it's creating an easier ISKCON, an easier, you know, if we can't talk about changing the world, at least we can talk about changing the devotee society, our Gaudiya Sangha in general. Forgive me, I'm a bit of an ISKCON fanatic, as everybody knows. So I don't just mean ISKCON, but the Gaudiya community needs to get these things right. And so it makes my service as a leader in a community, I'm the community director here in Ypsilanti, it makes my service so much easier when it's not like starting from square one when I'm talking to people about these dynamics and elements. So, you know, 54th episode, Hari Bol, it's so beautiful. And please keep going.
Jai.
Jai ho. Keep an eye out for on my social media. I know you guys do anyway because you it, but keep an eye out for my poll. I want to hear from you all. Talk about more.
Yeah, sure. David, just what you said about like it's so hard to be healthy or to be healthy in an unhealthy environment. Goodness gracious. I've been here in the wilderness, you know, for a long time. And it is hard. And I just want to say on a personal level, just being able to do the service or contribute to this space has, I think, in many serious ways kept me somewhat alive, at least personally. And I'm just so grateful to be here and to some or other still be able to be a part of it. So,
and that's a beautiful testimony, Karuna Prabhu, for what we've been discussing, which is that a man needs to feel like he's contributing to something. You got on this podcast 50 plus times over the course of the pandemic season, right? When some people couldn't get out of bed at all. There you were getting yourself cleaned up enough to come on and say something cogent, curate the thing, coordinate with people, bringing guests, coming up with topics. It's a lot. How many people have done 54 of anything in their life? And here you've done something so valuable over the course of a year and a half. And of course, that's uplifted you. Of course, you feel like you wouldn't have done it without that pressure, because that's how men work. We need pressure. We need that sense that
Facts.
people need me.
Facts.
That's what gets us out of bed, and to lean into that is beautiful. So your testimony is a great example of the general principle we've been trying to hit.
Nice.
Jai, Jai, Jai. Excellent. Jai, Jai Jagannath Prabhu. Any final feelings, comments, anything
No,
you'd like
no
to put
feeling.
out
Just
there?
I would just keep an eye out on the social media. I want to hear from you all. What sort of things? What other things we could talk about? And thank you for being with us and giving us encouragement. We do get pushback every now and again, but the amount of encouragement is abundant. And we're grateful for that. Grateful for this season to unfold and see how it does.
Yeah, we'll be in touch shortly about following episodes. Yeah, I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much for joining us and for being here. We are present obviously on Bodica's Facebook and YouTube, but then also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So you can just search for Arise, the Honest Man's podcast on those platforms. Makes it a bit easier to just, you can be on the move and hear the podcast. So thank you so much, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Hari Hari.
Later. Hari.